The idea is if you can go out and find something that's challenging for yourself, it really makes a big impact on you.
Have your own style, have your own version, but you need to know how to communicate. You need to know how to organize your day and set goals.
There's so much capacity in us to do more than we think we're capable of, and we don't always have to be leaning on that edge all the time. It's really important to touch in with that and to see what our capacity is.
Do you ever wonder what masculinity even is in the modern era? Do you want to move behind the macho bully or the soy boy archetype? I'm Marc Azoulay, and this is the Men's Therapy Podcast. Together, we'll explore how neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and Buddhist philosophy can transform your life, your marriage, and your business. Are you ready to deep dive into the minds of men? Let's begin.
Hello, welcome to the episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm here with Patrick McHeyser, and we're talking about young men and what they're going through these days. He works with kids that are called failure to launch, kids that feel lost as they're growing up. They don't quite enter adulthood. And what Patrick does, which I think is really awesome, is he blends wilderness survival skills with life coaching. He's a men's coach, and he runs a company called Odyssey Adventures. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be here.
So there's a ton to talk about. I love talking about young men. I think they really need people like you and shows like this. But before we dive into kind of the general topic, I'm curious about your story. How did you get started with this work?
Yeah, so I really was one of these kids for a short time in my life, right? I was this failure to launch for a moment. I dropped out of college after one quarter, not even a semester. I'd had enough. I wanted to come home. I had no direction, and really just ended up in my mom's basement playing video games, smoking weed. And fortunately, she was like, "You have to get a job. You can't just stay here. You have to have some kind of direction." And it was really helpful because I was able to get a job. I was able to save for a wilderness course, and that wilderness course really changed the trajectory of my life. And so that's a big part of why I'm here is trying to bring that same experience to young men in this modern era.
Awesome. So when you talk about failure to launch, right? Like it's descriptive, it's a little derogatory, right? But like there's more going on, so I'm curious for you and maybe for some of the clients you work on, like what was your mindset like? Like were you sad? Were you angry? Were you confused? Like kind of unpack for us, what was your day-to-day like?
Yeah, great question. So, I definitely felt sad. I definitely felt angry. And I think the biggest piece of that was probably more directionless, listless. Like I had no real end goal. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what my skills were. I didn't really value myself. And at the end of the day, I think that was the real root cause. And for me, again, the wilderness piece, that's really what transformed me and made me see myself in a different light.
So what dragged you out into the wilderness? Like, were you always curious about survival, or was there a mentor or something? Like, how did you start going outside?
Mark, I hated hiking. Okay. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, where, there's hiking trails everywhere. It's a really outdoorsy town. And I think almost in reaction to that, I really did not like doing any of that. I was a little bit averse to it. But it's interesting. My thread was, and people who know me now will kind of laugh at this because it doesn't really totally fit me, but I do think it is actually really cool. At one point when I was 16, I had a brief interest in the Navy SEALs. I just wanted to be a Navy SEAL so bad. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And they're really intense. It's a really intense training, and
pretty cool.
And everything that I knew about it was, well, you've got to learn to like suffer. And so there was always something in me that was interested in kind of like, okay, testing myself, pushing up against what my physical limits were. And I think that some piece of this wilderness course that I ended up, agreeing to do and actually selecting for myself, which was really, again, good fortune that I had that insight and a little push from parents, was a little bit about that. Like I wanted to test my mettle and see what that was about. So, and then I fell in love with it, right? I realized it wasn't all just suffering. It was actually a lot of fun. and that suffering could kind of go hand in hand with some fun, if that's what I was looking for. So that was really kind of the inroad, or the way in.
Yeah, you get the good old type 2 fun, right? Like the stuff that's fun after you do it. It's fun
Exactly.
to tell the story about. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So tell me about this course. Like, what did you learn? How did it function? Like, it sounds like that was a real catalytic moment for you.
It was amazing. Yeah, the course was NOLS. NOLS stands for and I went back later, ended up working for them for a lot of years. NOLS stands for the National Outdoor Leadership School. They have a whole leadership curriculum. I took a NOLS semester, so lots of college age kids will go take NOLS semesters, which are really it's several different types. They have everything from rock climbing sections to mountaineering to river rafting to horse packing to sea kayaking. And really what happens is you get a cohort of fellow students who are usually around 12 to 15 kids your age. They're not always kids. Some of them are in their like mid 20s, 30s, in that range as well. But typically it tends to be college age kids. And go out and you'll do, say 4 different skills. So a semester might be going, you might start with like a short backpacking section, then you go on a rock climbing section, then you go canyoneering for 30 days, then you go, say winter camping to like end out your semester. And so I did something like that. It wasn't those exact skills, but it was really amazing. It was 90 days, same people. I got really close to my course mates, and that alone I think was transformative. Seeing growth in others, seeing growth in myself with other people, really learning to communicate and get through a lot of the hardships that a group goes through out there was really huge. Yep.
I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about this, but to open the conversation of like male initiation, right? This idea of coming of age, of going from boy to man. That's what I just keep thinking about as you talk about this, right? Going from kind of like an indoor video game kid to 90 days doing all kinds of crazy shit. Like, did you feel like a man when you were done?
I really did. I walked away from that feeling so empowered and really in this sort of like, and I got kudos from my friends. They thought it was so badass what I'd gone and done. And it was really just like this special sort of like, I went through this initiation. I came back with this big beard, and not everybody's going to be able to grow facial hair like that. But that was like really cool to like walk away with this thing and come back to my community and say, yeah, this is me. I've like really gone through this. I've been through something special. And I think that is something we can dive into this more later too. But like you said, but it's really something that's missing in our society for sure, in a big way.
Yeah, you came back as a mountain man.
Totally. Exactly.
So what are some of the things that you learned about yourself or learned about the world when you were out there?
I think for one thing, I learned my capacity, right? So I remember I'd had this, I kind of would wimp out in my preteen and teen years, probably earlier than that too. But I remember having kind of a string of like wimp outs. Like I'd they'd send me to camp or something like that, and I'd always want to come back and couldn't totally go through the thing, or sign up for the mountain biking class, and I'd like have some kind of maybe some fun, but then like it ended up getting hard, and so I just kind of back off when it got hard. And I remember this real moment, like 5 days into the course, it was like pretty hard. I was feeling a little altitude sick, and just really actually coming to terms with that part of myself. And it was really personal. It was like, I could have said to my instructor, say, I'm done, I'm sick, I just need to go home. And there's nothing they could do to hold you there. They would just say, yeah, okay, all right, if that's really what you want, we'll take you out. And so I really had to come to terms with myself and say, no, like, look, you just need to see what happens on the other side of this, or you're never going to get there. And that moment, after being totally committed, I started to see the capacity in myself to find humor in difficulty, to inspire my peers, and to actually really use some of the human skills that I had kind of picked up throughout my life, and continue to hone those and learn those were a lot of what I ended up really getting out of that course.
That's great. I mean, I love that story of overcoming that wimp out moment. You know, I was reflecting back to moments like that I've had in my life, and I imagine every guy has had moments of that where we've run away and we've quit. And in the moment, it feels good because we're out of the suffering, but some of those can haunt us for the rest of our lives of like, man, what if I just pushed? What if I stayed? What if I approached that person or had that conversation or took that risk? And I do think that is what differentiates a boy from a man in a lot of ways, is like being able to like compartmentalize and push forward and know that like this is for long-term gain instead of short-term, you know, fear. And that, yeah, so many guys are afraid of being a coward, you know, and it sounds like this trip convinced you that you weren't a coward and that you could overcome your fears.
Totally. Yep. Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. I really feel that. I think there's so much capacity in us to do more than we think we're capable of. And we don't always have to, you know, be leaning and on that edge all the time. But I think it's really important to touch in with that, and to see what our capacity is, for ourselves. Really, at the end of the day, it's not for anybody else. It's just to remind ourselves, like, oh yeah, I can do this well. I actually got this. It's a really confidence building exercise.
100%. And I just, you know, I have a wilderness on a practice, on a hobby, right? Like I do tough backpacking trips a couple times a year. You know, I do a lot of like wilderness nature retreat ritual and stuff. And it's like, at this point, yeah, it's reminding myself that I still got it and that there's still this like wild primal part of me, you know, because most of my job, I mean, similar to yours, I imagine, is like sitting at this desk, you know, talking to people, working on the computer, working in a very like abstract world. And I agree with you. There's something so rewarding about like getting your hands in the dirt or hiking all fucking day, you know, or like pooping in the woods, you know, like those kind of like basic things.
No, 100%. And I think that's a big piece of it, that, and it doesn't have to, it can look different for everyone, right? Like hiking all day for some people might actually be 2 miles, right? It might actually not be that far, but that's not the point. The point is that it challenges you for yourself, right? So we don't have to be going and comparing ourselves and having, you know, all of these different standards, because you're never going to win in that game. But the idea is, if you can go out and find something that's challenging for you, for yourself, it really makes a big impact on you. It really has something there.
Yeah. So tell me more about some of the like survival skills or primitive skills that you teach, you know, and, you know, I've known you before the show, and every time we talk, I always think about how so many dudes are like obsessed with the apocalypse, right? Like what's going to happen post-apocalypse, right? Like what skills am I going to have? And my pet theory on that is I think that's us trying to connect with primal masculinity, because even though our civilization is very advanced and very safe, I think as men, on some level, we still respect survivalists. We still respect people that can shoot a gun, who can, you know, fix something, who can, you know, tame a horse, right? These like very kind of like old school skills. I'm curious what you think about that idea and how you incorporate that into your work.
It's such a metaphor. I think this is so critical, right? And so we can definitely do primitive skills and sort of some of the survival stuff, which is great. I think bow drill, that's an amazing metaphor. For example, right? You made fire where there was none before. You had no other implement other than really just rubbing 2 sticks together to create something out of nothing. I mean, that's incredibly empowering, right? What I'm mostly focused on that I think is still wildly applicable is a recreation capacity, right? So my personal discipline is rock climbing and mountaineering, right? And what's so cool about that is, for one thing, you go on a rock climbing or mountaineering expedition, you really, if something breaks, you're forced to fix it. And the point isn't that you brought all of the right things to fix it. That's not the point. And I'm not saying you should go out there and like intentionally not bring what you need, right? But when something goes wrong, you figure out, how am I going to fix this? Because we've got to sleep in the tent tonight. The tent pole breaks. What are we going to do to make this work? What are the tools that are at our disposal to figure this out? Because there isn't a roadmap. Things are going to happen in your life that don't necessarily line up with the plan, right? You can have the best laid plans, everything's laid down perfectly, and then something goes awry. That skill is so fundamental and transferable to your life. That moment of fixing the tent, it's not about that actual skill itself, right? It's about, again, that confidence. I can go out and figure this out. If the apocalypse happens, well, okay, maybe I don't totally know how to use a bow drill or shoot a gun, but you know what? I could figure something out. I would be okay. I could get scrappy. I could make that happen, right? And then I think there's another, just to pull one more thread there, I think there's an element of risk, right? Of real okay, where do I place protection on this rock climb that's going to keep me safe in the case of a fall? Or maybe I can get away with not placing some protection here because I feel really, really solid that I'm going to be able to climb, the next 10 feet without falling. I feel really confident in that and I'm going to be able to do it. Right. And I think that is another really important piece of being able to use your judgment to make calls in the moment that then actually empower you and make you feel like, oh yeah, I can do this. It's given me tremendous confidence in my life and I've really appreciated those skills.
Yeah, there's a great quote by Marc Azoulay in his book Meditations, where he essentially says the soil doesn't lie. And I use that a lot with my guys, this idea of, I think all men need a discipline. And again, I'm with you. It could be anything. There's not a prime discipline, but anything that does not lie to you, right? Whether it's rock climbing, whether it's hiking, whether it's survival, whether it's gardening, whether it's building things, fixing stuff, right? Something that I think as men, we need that feedback loop of is what I'm doing working, and to get both the feedback of yeah, maybe you kind of suck at this. It's okay, but you suck. You can't just bullshit your way through it. You can get better. And the reward at the end of yeah, you actually crushed that. That was an objectively hard mountain and you climbed an objectively hard mountain. I think we don't have that in our current society. It's so easy to have everything be kind of blustery and soft. We don't have a lot of hard feedback or hard mirrors, I guess.
100%. This is something that I've seen a lot in my clients is folks really, they're looking for the kind of easy out where, they can say, oh yeah, I did this thing, but they don't actually really want to do the work to get there. And I get it because I feel it in myself sometimes too. It's a totally natural human thing, right? We just kind of want this ease, right? This comfort. And at the end of the day, that's not a realistic picture of your life. And people want to avoid the discomfort. They really just want to be able to say, yeah, I did that and get the kudos without actually doing the work.
And I can get all up on my high horse about it, but it's it's so much outcome focus and so much clout in social media and status focused versus what I think, and I think you agree with this, the reward is learning, right? The reward is doing the thing and feeling competent instead of just marketing the thing.
Really well said. Yes, 100%.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about the importance of male mentors, and I feel that fits in here because, I think it is lonely. It's hard to learn these skills if you don't have somebody, I think, maybe specifically an older male, honestly, that can walk you through and that can be there when you fuck up and that can help you and teach you. So say a little bit about that. What is effective male mentorship in your eyes as it relates to this kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that effective male mentorship is, it really is, I think that it's a big question. And maybe more broadly, what I've had success with my mentees is really trying to give them a sense of what their role is, right? And not you need to figure out exactly what not that I'm going to tell them exactly what their life is going to look like, right? That's not the idea, right? I can't do that for them. What I can do is say, here are some key concepts, right? Let's talk about communication. Let's talk about grittiness. Let's talk about some of these overarching themes that I think you're going to see in your life, regardless of your career, of who you choose as a relationship partner, of who your family is. Let's talk about these themes and try to get them to apply to your life in a more specific way. So usually a client, for example, a client will come to me with a problem like, I'm having trouble being, recently one was, I'm having trouble being bullied at work. Okay, so how do you approach that bully, right? And this isn't like serious, really, really like big time harassment. It's just like, the uncomfortable joke here, the like kind of like put down there that is really problematic, but isn't quite enough to go to a manager yet. And it's like, all right, how are you and you're going to be able to see those in all different parts of your life. So regardless of whether you're in a place where you can go to a higher authority and say, hey, just like, this is okay behavior, right? Like you need to be able to confront this head on and be able to directly and clearly state what isn't okay about that behavior to that person and really stand up for yourself, right? And those are the kinds of things that I think are really central to male mentorship. Again, it's those like, what are the pieces in your life that you're going to see, the themes that you're going to see again and again until you start to really actually make some changes for yourself. I see it as my job to really help clarify, hey, this is a theme that it keeps coming up for you. Let's figure out how to address this successfully and directly and head on. I think that's really some of the key pieces of male mentorship.
Yeah, I really like that. And I like that you're like having, the talk with these kids, in a way that is so progressive and helpful. When I had the talk, it was like, my dad telling me like to use a condom, right? That's about as far as it went. And it was something that like I wanted more of these, like whenever I had this fantasy of like sitting around a campfire and having like 2 or 3 hour conversation about what it means to be a man, it means to be an adult. I think guys need that. I was fortunate enough that I had a lot of like digital and virtual mentors. Like I read a shit ton of books when I was getting into meds work and followed a lot of YouTubers, and that was where it started before I was able to, find them in real life. So I guess I encourage our listeners, like, follow Patrick. And there's also a lot of other great spokespeople out there that are having these talks. So just because you didn't have it doesn't mean you're like screwed. But I think guys need that. I think they need that like attention and love of being like, hey man, like this is what life is about. This is like what you need to kind of figure out how to do. And like you said, you can do it in any style you want, like have your own style, have your own version, but like you need to know how to communicate. You need to know how to have a conflict. You need to know how to like organize your day and set goals. I mean, just like really basic things, but stuff that I think gets neglected all too often.
Yep, 100%. And this is something that in a different way, I see a lot of women being really good at. Right? Like they find community and figure out how to support each other in this sort of feminine way of like, oh, like I'm feeling a little bit concerned about my, like how I look today. So can you help, and it's this kind of like subtle, like ask for, help or validation that isn't going to jive with men, right? That's not typically how we approach those kinds of situations, but there is a masculine way to go about asking for and looking for support that I think is really one of the core pieces of why we're seeing so many of these, like we said, failure to launch folks, or just why, honestly, even quote unquote successful men are really struggling right now is lacking that framework and that community piece, those mentors.
Yeah, can you dig into a little bit more? I mean, I have the version that we do at MTO of what like male support and honestly what male love looks like. But I'd be curious from your perspective, like how would you describe that masculine support maybe as compared to feminine support?
Yeah, totally. So I think typically male support is it's a little bit more, I like to say like for me, for example, and not every guy is like this, but I notice a lot of men really like this. Shit giving is my love language. Like if you're giving me shit for something, like something about that, and it really feels like true to me. Like you're like, oh, yeah, Patrick, you're doing that thing again, dude. That's just ridiculous. That's such a silly, and I can't think of an example right now, but you're doing just that stupid thing that you always do again. That's just ridiculous. And you're kind of like giving me a little bit of like ball busting for it. I actually think that's me feeling, I will laugh really hard typically, because I actually think that's like me being like seen in some way. Like I actually feel like, oh yeah, this dude, they get me, right? Like he gets me. Um, and that kind of like bantery relationship is something that I've noticed really jives with a lot of men. For instance, I also think that like men, we can be really task oriented, and I think just getting shit done, going out and like learning woodworking together, right? Like picking up a hobby. I think that's one reason that I really connect with outdoors, is like it's just such a good way for me to connect with my friends. Honestly, it's like I have some really analytical friends. We can just talk all day, but sometimes just getting outside and not saying a word and just like being in it together and having this shared experience is just as powerful as conversing. And the final thing maybe I would say on that is sometimes just even a little bit of like windshield time. Like I think, in a healthy way, playing some video games together, it's great. It's like we're not like talking at each other like, oh dude, how's your day going? But like sitting there and like, yeah, we're like playing video games, maybe like, and then maybe like 5 minutes into one of the games, like, oh, how's it going? Like how's your life, dude? Like, or, how'd that date go? Right. But this a little bit more like we're engaged in some other process, and it's not so high stakes. Like I can share what I need to, instead of like being forced to like sit down and I'm sure this is what you're really good at and with your guys, is like not necessarily forcing the share, right? Because it doesn't always work that well, in my experience.
Totally. Yeah. And I'm happy that you're doing the work that you do, because it's like, yeah, I think guys grow through challenge and we grow through shared experience. We don't really grow through one-on-one relating. I think that's like I think we brief and we debrief, right? Like I think it's helpful to talk about like, okay, we're going to go in, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. Like here's the plan, here's the agenda, execute. And then we debrief of like, hey, like here's what went well, here's what didn't go well. Here's like, our lessons that we learned, how are we going to do it better next time? I think men are like very mission oriented, and our conversations tend to be on either side of an experience. Not the talking isn't the experience, which I think a lot of women don't quite understand. And I think a lot of female therapists definitely don't understand, is they think that the talking is the focus, and it's not. The talking is in service of the challenge.
Well said. Really well said.
Yeah. There's a great book of Boys and Men that I'm sure you've read, Richard Reeves, and he talks about, it's a bunch of like data and scientific of gender differences, and what guys are going through, right? And one thing that he said, he cites a study of male and female parents at a playground, and they see like by and large, I want to say like 85%, like a huge majority follow this pattern where the female parent, the mom, when the kid is up on the jungle gym, the mom is underneath them, right? Like with their arms open, ready to catch them if they fall. They're there, they're like saying, oh, I got you, don't worry, you're safe, right? A lot of reassurance, a lot of validation, making sure they don't get hurt. The male parent, the dad, is often on the jungle gym with them and is higher up and is encouraging them to climb higher, And I think that's like just the perfect metaphor, because it's not a metaphor, it's true, it's science, right? Like that's like the thing. And you need both, right? Like you need both masculine and feminine love. You need someone to catch you when you fall, and you also need someone to encourage you to climb higher.
Yep, totally. I was just thinking about this because I was hanging out with my friends who have it's two of my close friends from high school, and both of them have relatively young kids, like 2 and 3. And just watching the ways that they interact, I think it's really powerful. And it's really primal. It's this, they're both boys, these young kids are, and they don't really go to the female, or they don't go to their dads for comfort, right? They go to the dads to like go play with toys, and the dads are like setting boundaries, and not that the moms can't do that, but I do see that as being a really powerful father figure that these kids have. And honestly, I'm really proud of my friends for how they're raising their kids. Because I don't think that they're reading any parenting books necessarily. Maybe they have done some, but it just does seem really intuitive. It just seems like what they want to do and how they want to interact with their boys.
If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show. Yeah, I think it's critical. Like, I think, the boundaries, again, men are so much more compartmentalized and women are so much more fluid. And I think, kids need both. They need both an internal masculine and feminine to be successful. And I think a lot of these failure to launch boys, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, they don't have containment. We talk about this kind of like mushiness. And again, I've been there to some extent, like this internal mushiness, this internal kind of like fluidity, like a lack of convictions, a lack of direction. There's like not enough structure. And I think for a lot of guys, at least most heteronormative guys, like the lack of structure creates procrastination and creates depression. It's not relaxing for us. It's actually like very destabilizing,
Totally. I think this is one thing that I feel like our society really isn't. I think there's been a lot of in this like unpacking of, a lot of the really crappy things that men have done in the past, or the really crappy ways that men can behave, don't always behave, right, but can behave. I think that there has been this sort of loss of that container and that structure, right? We're just being told, oh, you need to be, right? Like, I think the classic thing is, and I want there to be a version of positive masculinity, but I think that commonly what I've seen is positive masculinity is actually just femininity, right? We're saying, it's just like positive masculinity. It's just like men need to learn how to be softer and sort of more community minded. And look, I actually think there's totally room for men to grow in that way, 100%. And I don't think that is masculinity. I think that's femininity. And so for men to get more comfortable with their feminine side, 100%. Like, go do that. I think that's really valuable for you. And I think to get really comfortable with your masculine side, that looks way different. And a lot of these behaviors that we're associating with, quote, like toxic masculinity, I would just say that's just not mature. It's just sort of like young dudes who are doing really sometimes just kind of like juvenile things and sometimes really shitty, actually actively damaging behaviors, right? Versus if you can mature your masculine style a little bit more, it's actually gonna be more respected, and there's actually more of a place for that in our society.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I think we have a lack of masculinity. I agree completely, right? And these ideas of like, the values I have are strength, courage, mastery, and honor. I talk about a lot on some of the other shows, but like really embodying these masculine values, I think is critical because, and I want to actually put it back to you. Let me take a step back, right? Because I think a lot of the toxic masculinity stuff is like 2 generations too old. And I think our field, the mental health field, wellness field, is really behind, right? So when you think of a toxic masculine, it's like this bully archetype, right? It's the guy who is pushing everybody around. He's intimidating. Maybe he's got a drinking problem. He hits his wife, right? Like you have this like stereotype of this dude. And I think that was true for the boomer generation and certainly the silent generation. That was a lot of men were like that. But if you look at our generation, you look at millennials, you look at, Gen X, Gen Z is another thing. But if you look at, the 2 generations that I work with, a lot of it is like a nice guy. It's no masculine, right? It's a guy that is like a people pleaser. And again, as a former nice guy, I can say this, like a chameleon, right? Like lack of confidence, often like spending a lot of time online, anger is coming out in very safe ways like Twitter or whatever, right? But not actually expressing aggression in a healthy way. There's an obesity epidemic. There's guys that like, I can't tell you how many like social functions I've been to with my wife where the husbands don't say anything, like literally do not say anything, right? The wives are the ones that are talking and like the husbands are just like silent and meek in the corner, maybe like nursing a beer, like quiet, like that like freaks me out. So yeah, I'm seeing you not a lot. Like, is that what you're seeing with our generation? And how would you diagnose that issue?
100%. I would say that's something that I notice in myself too, and I think that like actually in a lot of ways I do kind of embody, like a lot of people who know me well will say, oh yeah, like you kind of balance that masculine and feminine well, which I think I do. But the truth is, I think when I was really in that more, I worked in a work culture for a long time. Let me back up a little bit and say, I worked in a work culture for a long time that really celebrated this like positive masculinity, right? They really were kind of almost training me to be a little bit more meek and step back. And what I noticed was when I moved on from that work culture and actually moved cities, it totally transformed my mental health. Like I got easily 30% happier just being a little ways away from that in a place where I felt like I could be more authentically myself. And frankly, for me, that felt like a more masculine presence. Suddenly I was like giving myself permission just by being removed from that cultural context to actually embody some of the values that I had that were sort of nascent in me. Like exactly what you're talking about, this kind of like strength, courage. I would say for me, oftentimes it's a little bit more assertiveness. I would say like a little bit more dominance. And these are the kinds of things that right now it's like almost uncomfortable to talk about, because if you say those things, it can be perceived, I think, in our culture as toxic, right? Oh, you're assertive. Well, that means that you're going to be therefore kind of like quashing somebody else. And I think again, that's an immature version of masculinity, right? Like if your version of assertiveness is just to steamroller other people's ideas, that is immature. That's, I don't know, we could use the word toxic. I don't necessarily love it, but yeah, for lack of a better phrase, like that could be considered toxic. But just to be assertive and state your needs and like what you want to see in, say, a work project, gosh, I think that's just good masculine communication. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And again, in some cultures right now in our society, subcultures, that feels like a dangerous thing to be able to talk about.
I know, which I'm happy we're talking about now, because I think it is really critical, and I think we're in alignment on a lot of that stuff. Like, yeah, and I like your distinction of mature versus immature, because my mind goes to, it's like, just read the room, right? It's like there is a time to be dominant. There is a time to be an advocate for yourself. There's a time to be assertive. But, if people are shutting down, or they're giving you one-word answers, or they're like looking away, or if they're like itchy, they want to get out of there, like, probably not working, So I think it challenges men to be more emotionally intelligent, right? And be able to read a room and see what's going on. So they're not just like using the hammer every time, right? They're using like the best tool for the job. But, there's a saying that goes around AA, which is, 180 degrees from sick is still sick. And I think that's where our generation is like, we're trying to be the opposite of this toxic masculine bully, and we're still sick. Like, we still haven't quite gotten the memo, because we're still a negative personality trait, right? It's not, we're moving towards something. We're just trying not to be something.
Completely. And I think that the dark side of this is, I think a lot of the problems that you're seeing with extremists on and I would say on both sides, I think that this creates a breeding ground for extremism, right? When you have one part of humanity that is being repressed, this masculine side, if you repress that, it's going to find a way to express itself, both in individuals and as a society, right? So then you have this sort of like the really nasty stuff that kind of gets generated in, chat rooms online and stuff like that, where people just kind of feed into a silo, and suddenly, all women are terrible, and you get conspiracies generated. People want to like take up arms. They want to be really violent in ways that are not productive for our society, right? It's not defending the country. It's like attacking its own citizens. And I think like a mature version of that is like, yeah, I want to go like serve in the armed forces and like or maybe not that, but like I want to find a way to like defend the things that I care about. And instead of being just out and out aggressive, I want to go find a way that I can like protect what I value and what's really important for me. And instead you see that come out as like, yeah, just lots of really kind of extreme thoughts and violent thinking that again isn't productive. It's not constructive. So I think to sum up that thought, I really think that our society has to reconcile this. I think it's actually critical in the next 5 to 10 years that we really, and hopefully sooner, that we really continue to have exactly these kinds of conversations in a broader, in bigger platforms, right? Like, I mean, I think this podcast is great for this reason, and we just need to keep having this, because otherwise it's going to get really ugly, is the way that I see it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think men need other men. You know, I work with a handful of ex-Proud Boys, because actually the Proud Boys are really active in Colorado. We're a hotspot out here. I work with a lot of guys who are, you know, deprogramming themselves from the Proud Boys. And what they talk about is exactly what you're saying. But what they get out of it, which I think the media doesn't really talk about, is what they get out of it is community. Because yeah, on the chat rooms, of course, there's a ton of misogyny. There's a ton of anti-authority. Like, it's really violent and scary. But what there also is the stuff that we talked about earlier of like, hey man, how'd that date go? Right? Or like, hey, do you need help fixing something around your house? Or like, hey, you know, anyone got a truck to help me move? Like, that stuff is also there, you know? And it's like these dudes are getting male community in a way that I think men really need, but it just comes with this like poison pill that you have to take in order to get access to it. Because I don't think there's really many outlets for healthy male community, right? They are in these like undercover chat rooms and in these extremist groups. That's where guys are finding other dudes that like actually show up for them, you know, in ways that maybe their father didn't, or maybe, you know, their religious community did, right? Like, they're getting their needs met. It's just confused.
Right. And validation, right? Yeah, your struggle is real. Where else do you see that, right? Like, you can go through YouTube videos of where people are talking about, you know, men suffering, and the backlash to that on social media is like, men are struggling. Well, sorry, just figure it out, guys. And it's super ironic, because the same exact people will say, well, men need community. They need to figure this out for themselves. Men, you need to solve your own problems. And the irony is, wait, isn't that supposed to be, hold on. So you're saying like the antidote to this like rugged individualism is more rugged individualism? It doesn't sit well with me. And I think to actually say, like, yeah, you're human, you're a man, you're gonna have problems. Like, your life, just because you have privilege, doesn't mean that your life is gonna be all peachy and perfect. And yes, there are real downsides and like difficulties to being men, and maybe especially in this day and age. There's a lot of difficulty that men are facing right now. And I think to actually have that heard, gosh, I mean, that alone is actually just kind of radical. So, and there's also, right to your point, like there's a lot of good things that are coming out of those communities, even if right, like as you say, that you have to take that toxic pill. There's encouragement. Go to the gym. Like, how's your date going? Like, you should be out there dating. Oh, like, here's a little bit of encouragement and dating advice. There's very little good dating advice out there for young men. And frankly, even at like, you know, in my mid 30s, I was kind of confused of like, how do I go out and like talk to women? How do I cut through this? You know, like, I'm in a new city. How do I cut through this online? Like, how do I actually get through the like online dating app thing and go out and actually connect with a woman that I'm interested in? It's really, really challenging, because there's so much competition out there for you in that space. And that's really hard. It's really demoralizing as a man in our society to not feel like you have access to something that is like so basic, of just partnership and like sex and love and all the things that go with that.
Yeah. So many of my sessions with my late 20-year-olds or early 30-year-olds are just dating coaching, so
Totally.
100%.
Totally.
And like, it's
Right.
that, and a theme we've been talking about. It's like also that companionship, right? It is so like, I'll go through profiles with my guys, right? I'll be like, cool, pull up your profile, let's do it, right? Like, let's take a look at your pictures, let's take a look at your prompts. Oh, who are you talking to? Let me see your messaging, right? Like, let me see who you're swiping on. Oh, maybe try this girl. Definitely don't do that one, right? Like that level of camaraderie, guys don't get, which I think women don't really understand because they get that all the time. But dudes do not get that. We don't get someone that is like that close to our life, that is like literally looking at each person we're swiping on, right? Or who sees us in that way, right? Who is at the gym with us week by week as we're getting stronger and progressing. Like, we don't get seen like that at all. Whereas I think, and that's not against women, like I think that's on us to create it. But I think women do a lot better with friendship, and they do a lot better with like committing to each other and showing up and like really being involved, and like, my wife is texting her friends like all the time. To be clear, I don't really want that. I'm not a big texter, but like I can see the value in like those relationships that are really, really close and really, really intimate on a day-to-day basis. Dudes don't,
Right.
we don't really have that.
No, we sure don't. That's exactly right. And I think that this is the piece that I think we really need some type of coaching and help around, is like, how do you reach out? How do you associate? How do you, I think, have basic conversations, but then like, how do you just go out and meet other guys out in the world? Like, say you've moved to a new city, like, how do you actually build that male community that you're craving? Just a short anecdote. I have a friend who, he's a close friend of mine, and I think he's got a good career. He's a software engineer. He does really well at that. He makes really good money. He's the main breadwinner for his household, all really positive things. And I think that this is, I was reading an article recently where they were naming this as a trend of men are oftentimes the remote workers. They're the stay-at-home, the software engineers, the people who are doing more of the like IT technical work, where you can have a little bit of flexible schedule to do this pretty technical, heavy lifting. And then they'll also move with their partners, their female partners, who are more career in-person oriented, right? And so he's had the same thing. His wife's a doctor, and she kind of selected their place of residence where she's really happy with her career. She doesn't make as much money as she might like to, but the most important thing is she's got this fulfilling practice where she's helping, women in this kind of niche area. And she's with all of her friends. Like, she's selected a place where she has community, which is great for her. But my friend still, he doesn't really have that much community because there's no work. His work community is completely remote, and he doesn't know where to go out and access other men, right? And he really is a guy's guy. He really likes spending time with his boys, right? So I think we need to find a way to help each other in this state of like draw each other out of the house, because we're just social animals, just on a basic level. Humans we really need other social connection, even if it looks different than it does for a lot of women. And some independence from our partners in that way too. And I'm not saying he's not independent from his partner, but socially, he tends to be a little bit more dependent. He doesn't have his own friends as much. And I think this is really common right now. So I guess my question is, how do we go out and find that? And I'd be curious to hear your answer to this. Is like, how do we as men support each other in that, in kind of drawing each other out of our houses into like a broader men's community?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, like that's like where my life is kind of going that way, right? It's like luckily I've been in Colorado forever, so I have a ton of friends. But I moved up to Evergreen, and like I'm making new dude friends, right, at the gym, right? It's like I go to CrossFit and I go 3 times a week, and I chat with these guys there. And we're having our first mandate next week. We're going to go off roading, so I'm pretty stoked on that.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, taking it out of the gym, taking it into the real world.
Yeah,
and like we host like barbecues and shit at our house, but like. Yeah, I don't have work friends, right? Like my coworkers are my cats, and like I have a couple people that, contractors that work for me, but they're all over the country. And I have friends that I've known for a long time, but because of life circumstances, we're all long distance, right? We kind of ended up in different parts of the world. And my girlfriend, or my wife, sorry, Caroline, has like work friends. She has a work community. Her job is very social. I mean, very similar to the story that you're telling. So it's like, I think that is becoming way more common. But to answer your question, I think like I think men's brains work with compartmentalization. Again, I think that's something that's been demonized as toxic masculinity, but I think it's just like literally biology and like how we work. So I think compartmentalizing it, of being like, hey, something like men's therapy online, right? To pitch my own thing. It's like, this is where you go to meet other dudes that like want to talk a little bit more emotionally, right? Or your program, right? Like Aussie Adventures. This is where you go to meet guys that are interested in the outdoors, but also like want a little bit more, right? It's not strictly outdoor education. It's also life skill and community building. Again, what I just said, the gym is really helpful for me. Like CrossFit, I picked that one because it's good for my needs, because I would never do anything without someone making me do it. And it's very social by design. It's like a team-based workout. Everyone's on the same team. There's scoreboards. Like the gym I go to is great. They have like barbecues and they have like holiday parties and stuff. Like I think as guys, we need the structure, because we're not going to like go to the bar and like ask a guy on a date. We're not going to like talk to somebody randomly at the farmer's market. Like we're not that open. Like when I'm shopping at Home Depot, right? I'm not trying to meet someone at the hardware store. I'm trying to like get my shit, get out of there as fast as possible so I can keep doing my project, right? I'm not like open, I think, in the same way more feminine individuals are. We're like, oh, I had a great conversation in the grocery store. I'm like, motherfucker, I would never talk to anyone in the grocery store. I got to get my eggs and get out of there. I got shit to do, Like,
I know.
So I think we need structures. Yeah.
I'm laughing partly because I have this exact same experience. Like my partner, who's very social, she's really gregarious and she's amazing at it, right? Like she networks like a machine because she's just naturally friendly to absolutely everyone. But it drives me crazy because I just want to go to the grocery store or go to Home Depot and we don't have to like say hi to everybody's dog, And it is, I'm like in task mode, I'm not going to be unfriendly, but I'm like not trying to be your best friend. I just want to pay for the thing and get out of there,
Yeah. I will ask you for advice. If I don't know something, I'll be like, hey, what size grommet should I buy? Right. But like, I'm not going to ask you about your life, like,
totally.
And you know what? You don't want to know about my life either. Like, let's just pretend, like,
completely.
Let's just let the pretense.
Totally.
So yeah,
totally.
I think like more structures. And I think historically that was the church, right? But a lot of people are moving away from the church for a variety of reasons, but nothing has replaced that, right? Or the town hall, or it was, if you were in a smaller town, like a village festival where like everybody contributed something, right? Or agricultural communities, like there were structures historically. And, now living in Evergreen in a mountain town, like we have some of those and I'm engaging in some of those, and that's great. But like in even places like Boulder, where I lived for most of, the past 10 years, it's too big to me. I think it's too big to really have that type of community. It's very easy to just like become a face in the crowd. And then not even talking about things like a city, right? New York or Denver or San Francisco or whatever. Like, it's too big for the brain to even comprehend.
Right. And historically, those cities, they had their little, and this created lots of problems too. I'm not saying it was like, totally idyllic, but they had their own little cultural communities, right? If you're Italian, you came from Italy, you moved to Little Italy, right? And then you hung out, you recreated sort of those like social structures that you had with the village, and like you had your people in your neighborhood and those kinds of things. Now everybody just kind of moves from wherever. And in a lot of ways, it's really cool. Like, I think probably a lot of those cities are, I'm not a big city guy myself, but I see where people really thrive on this kind of like constant novelty, meeting new people. There's this sort of like endless frontier of what's possible for you, which is really amazing. And it comes with the downside of that same flexibility comes with a lot of the downsides that are created by not having those like smaller, tighter knit communities when everything's so diffuse and you can kind of, well, it's not going perfectly with this one person right now, so I'm just going to hop to the next thing, make a lateral move and see if that works for me better, instead of really having to just invest with the same people year after year and kind of like fix the problems for better or for worse.
Right. Like deal with their crazy neighbors. Like that's a skill in that, right? And it's like maintaining like diplomatic relationships. I think, similar, I'm not much a city guy, but I agree. Like, I think having too much choice creates this like flitting thing, or this thing where you can jump between and you can avoid a lot. And then you times that by 1 billion by like adding the internet, which is like infinite community, right? It's like just the hive mind, everyone's in it, right? So it's like crazy. And I think there is something to be said for like small forced choices and commitments, with I think the added caveat of modern society of it being consensual. I think where it was problematic in the past is like, because of privilege and oppression or whatever, like if you were born in a small village, you're young, you're not going to leave that village, right? Like you don't have the money, you don't have the opportunity, you don't have the resources, you're not going to leave it. But I think what I'm doing and what I encourage guys to do is like find your village, find your tribe, and then double down and root down into it. Like we do have the privilege of choice now and the ability to really go pretty much wherever for the most part, with the right resources and strategy and planning. But then I do think there is something really valuable about like niching down and being like, hey, these are my people for thick and thin. I think a big part of being a man versus a boy is I think a man enjoys taking on commitment and responsibility, whereas a boy avoids commitment and responsibility. And I think like those commitments and responsibilities is what gives us personality and gives us meaning. It's like the threads to the other people and to the community and to whatever, even if it's like, yeah, I go to the cookout and I cook the best ribs. Like, it's cool to be the rib guy, like it's just cool to like just have like a moniker, have like a place of belonging, even if it's something very surface to begin with.
Totally. Right. But then you get accolades and build confidence from that place in your community. I think that's a really important piece that you hit on. And it's so critical that people select a good tribe for them and for the world, right? Like the Proud Boys, not going to be good for you or for the world, even if you're getting something out of that. But something like Men's Therapy Online, or Odyssey, like you're going to get something out of this that's going to be really positive. You're going to find community of people who are going to support you and not force you into, some pretty like nasty political situations and some things that are probably just going to frankly be really damaging. But exactly to your point, you do have that choice. And it is really hard to commit because you do have, there's so many different communities and so many different identities that you can take on. So I would be curious, what's your solution to this of like, how do people choose when you have, thousands of communities that you can choose from?
Yeah. I think talking to other guys, right, about like, their experience, about where they're from. I think doing the personal work, whether that's through coaching or therapy or even just self-study and books, of like really figure out who you are. I think that's critical. And finding a community that like reflects your values instead of one that is telling you what to value. I think those communities are very dangerous. That's where it becomes like cult territory, where it's like they prey on people that are empty and they try to fill them up with like their dogma. I think good communities embrace diversity of all types and especially diversity of thought. I think that's really critical because, again, I see that in a lot of like, I'm middle of the road politically, but I see a lot of actually far left communities where they embrace a lot of diversity as far as what people look like, but zero diversity of thought. Everybody has to think, believe, and feel and say the same things. And that's like really scary to me. So yeah, I think something that like has value, something that like you feel like you belong and actually have a place. And like, sure, sometimes there's a hierarchy in communities, but something where you feel like even though you might be just new in a community, you immediately feel respected and valued and part of something bigger. I think that's critical because I think guys want to feel like they're valuable.
Yep, I agree with that 100%. And I think that's where, two approaches that I've found to be really helpful in working with guys in the past is and I love that you say this right up front, what your values are. It is so important that we figure out what we value, right? Because that's going to be I think that is the solution to a lot of the like analysis paralysis of like, I mean, the classic study is like, what breakfast cereal do I choose? You're getting overwhelmed by these choices because you don't really know, or at least you can't, it's harder to touch in with what you actually value. And so for me, this is why I think exactly what we're talking about, to bring it full circle, backpacking trips, wilderness retreats, those kinds of things are so valuable. Getting out in the wilderness by yourself, those kinds of things are so valuable because it allows you to circle back and either figure out what you value if you don't already know, or to actually retouch in with what you value and reground in that, because it's so easy. Social media, social media, the internet, all of these different mediums that we have now that are in many ways great. Well, it can really pull you away. You start looking at, oh, well, gosh, shoot, money wasn't really one of my values, but man, that car looks really good. And I saw like, Andrew Tate on a private jet, like, dude, that guy looks like he's having a blast. So maybe I actually value that, and to get pulled away from that, which I think is actually a real source of unhappiness, and the reason that people kind of get trapped in the end in kind of, again, full circle, that failure to launch category, because they just don't really know where they're trying to go.
Yeah. And I think, just to kind of highlight what you're saying, those backpacking wilderness experiences are just times alone. It's just you. So you're kind of in like a pressure cooker, and your values get clarified, like first through thought, but then through action of like, hey, how do I want to deal with this adverse situation? How do I want to tell the story? What am I drawn to? I think like that self-discovery and that mirroring process is really critical. So we're moving towards the end of our show. This has been a great conversation. I'll certainly have you back on in the future. But Patrick, where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you and the work that you do?
That's great. Yeah, I am. You can look at my website, oadventures.com. That's Odyssey Adventures. I do have an Instagram. I'm sometimes terrible about posting, and I promise to start getting on that. And that's at oadventures as well on Instagram.
Fantastic. Yeah, check out his stuff. We'll put that all in the show notes. You can go and look. And yeah, if this episode spoke to you, or even better yet, if there's a young man that you think needs to hear some of this and needs to get access to some great mentorship and some great conversation through Patrick, send him his way. Share this episode with them. Let them know that it's not all Andrew Tates and Proud Boys out there, that there are other types of guys talking about other shit that is definitely way healthier and probably better for young men to be exposed to. And they might not just know, right? Because some of these more toxic people have much bigger platforms and louder voices. So anything that you can do to, like the episode, share it, subscribe, that really does help to support the show and gets the message out there to guys that need it. So Patrick, thank you again for being on the show. I really enjoyed our time together.
Thanks so much, Mark. It was great to be here.
And listeners, thank you so much. We'll see you next week in another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to visit menstherapy.online to learn more about the work that we are doing to support and inspire men. Until next time, keep moving forward.